Okay, so you hear this term, international law, thrown around all the time, right? Especially when some major conflict hits the news. But then you see these powerful nations seemingly ignore the rules, and it's totally natural to ask, is any of this actually real, or is it all just an elaborate lie?
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? I mean, there's no world police force to enforce these laws. There's no global SWAT team that's going to rappel down and raid a capital city. So, is international law just a fancy term for a set of polite but, ultimately optional suggestions?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. It turns out that the most compelling proof that international law is real actually comes from the very nations that are accused of breaking it. It really all boils down to what a country does when it gets called out. When the rest of the world points a finger and shouts, "Hey, you broke the law." What that nation does next, well, that tells you everything you need to know about the hidden power of this whole system.
I mean, think about it. When a state uses force, they almost never just say, yeah, so what? This law is fake. We don't care. No, they lawyer up. They build these super complex arguments to try and prove that what they did was somehow legal. See, they aren't dismissing the game. They're trying to convince everybody they're playing by the rules. And look, this isn't just a one-off thing. This consistent behavior points to what some experts call a law habit. It's this deep, ingrained practice that shows that, yeah, nations really do believe in the system. So, where do we actually see the evidence for this habit? So, this law habit pretty much shows up in four key ways. It's everything from the boring day-to-day paperwork of governments to how states officially recognize the law, to the vast unseen amount of obedience to the rules, and finally, how they choose to solve their arguments. And this is a really crucial point. International law isn't just for dramatic headline-grabbing moments. Its real power is in the daily grind. Every single day, government lawyers are advising their leaders based on these rules. National courts are applying them. It's all this boring, invisible bureaucracy that actually proves the system is humming along. And you can see this play out time and time again in major conflicts. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, it didn't say the law was pointless. It went out and hired lawyers to argue its case was legal. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was fiercely debated by both sides on legal grounds. Even the 2011 intervention in Libya sought UN authorization to give it a basis in law. The pattern here is it's undeniable. You don't bother arguing the rules of a game you think is completely fake. And this brings us to a really great analogy, the obedience iceberg. So for every single violation you see on the news, there are literally thousands of agreements on everything from mail delivery to air travel to trade that are just followed, quietly, every single day. We only ever see that tiny tip of the iceberg, the big dramatic fights, while this massive, stable base of quiet cooperation stays totally hidden from view. Okay, so we've established that states act like the law is real, but it's obviously not the same as the laws we have in our own countries, right? So what gives? It's fair to call it a weak system, but let's dig into why weak doesn't necessarily mean fake. The key difference really boils down to one simple word: centralized. You see, inside a country, you've got a central government, like a parliament or Congress, making the laws. And you've got a central police force to enforce them. Simple enough. But international law, it's completely decentralized. It grows out of treaties and customs between countries. And enforcement isn't about police, it's about things like sanctions or just good old international pressure. And this right here is the absolute core of the argument. People call international law weak because of its less organized, decentralized structure, not because the rules themselves have no teeth. The obligation to follow the law is absolutely real. The way it gets enforced just looks very, very different. All right, so after all of that, where do we land? What's the final verdict here? Let's pull all these threads together. The simple truth is this: international law exists, it's real, because the community of nations collectively believes in it, and more importantly, acts like it does. It's their behavior that breathes life into the whole system.
So, if you're going to take away three things from all this, what should they be? First, the whole system is built on the shared belief of the countries themselves. That's its foundation. Second, and this is that wild paradox we talked about, the lawbreakers actually end up validating the system when they try to argue their case from inside the rules. And third, remember not to mix up a weak structure with a fake law. It's a different kind of system, for sure, but it is a real one. So, maybe we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. The evidence really does show that the system is real. So the truly important question, it isn't if it exists, It's knowing how it works and how it doesn't. How do we make it stronger?